You're listening to the SEL in Action podcast, the podcast where we explore what social and emotional competencies look like in various professional settings. Today, on episode 4, we're talking with Sarah White, the Ph.D. princess. And Sarah is a Ph.D. candidate in teaching and learning and a science communicator. And she's a cognitive scientist and learning scientist by training and explores how math teachers evaluate online resources. So thank you, Sarah, so much for being with me here today and to chat with me. And so,
Thanks so much for having me.
Anything you want to add to that intro?
No, that was great. Yeah, science communication. That's what I study. You had a great
Perfect.
summary. Great science communication.
Okay, so our big question is, what is PhD Princess?
Yes. So the PhD Princess is just the science communication platform that I kind of started on my own for fun during my PhD. I was doing a lot of like research into Disney on my own, and I wanted to turn it into something a little more productive. So I started to share the research that I was doing both on Instagram and on a blog. And it ended up turning into and getting me an internship doing science communication and science writing for a summer with the American Association for the Advancement of Science, AAAS. And I'm still trying to continue doing science communication on the side and branching it into teaching others how to teach and using more of my experience and expertise in teaching to share research on teaching specifically. So combines my love of learning about other sciences and Disney and sharing it with the world.
Excellent. And so, just kind of doing my research on you a little bit, you've had some really varied contributions through like your internship and just different things that you've created. Like you've written for Discover Mag, and you had some really interesting ones there, like the one about like the cougars and La La Land. I saw that one.
Yeah.
And kind of the science about why it's not so nice in La La Land for the cougars.
Yes.
And then in your own blog, one that really jumped out to me was categorizing the different Pixar female characters into what like graduate program they would go into. That was really neat.
Yeah, I always have fun writing those. I'm glad you enjoyed that.
So yeah, it's really apparent on how you're connecting this like science communication and your love for Disney and Pixar and all these other movies. And I wonder, like, in looking at Disney movies and Pixar movies, they're often kind of built from originally the old like fairy tales like Snow White and all those like different stories, which really focused on like moral education and character ed, like don't do this because this will happen. Right, like Hansel and Gretel, like you get eaten by the witch.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And so I wonder what like social emotional competencies, so like various self-management skills, self-awareness skills, social awareness, relationship building, or decision-making skills, you kind of see these movies fostering for children and youth and even adults. We like to watch them, so
Yeah. Oh, I feel like I learn things, and you can learn things about your emotions and how you process them by rewatching Disney movies and having totally different reactions to them than you might have had as a kid. I know they still make me cry, even maybe more as an adult. But yeah, I think there's a lot of great examples. I think more of the examples that I can think of are more prominent in some of the more recent movies, like Rapunzel or Tangled and Rapunzel and Princess of the Frog, Tiana, just because it seems like there's more character development in those fairy tales rather than like Sleeping Beauty, where the main character, Sleeping Beauty, is only on the screen for 18 minutes or something like that. And so there's not as much like character development in her, but maybe in some of the other characters. But yeah, I think one of the main aspects of storytelling really comes from having a goal that you're working towards. That's kind of the foundation to a lot of stories. Someone has to go do something and figure out how they're going to get to the thing that they're going to do. So I think there's a lot of the self-management skills there can be gleaned from and observed in movies like Lion King, or as well as Tangled and Princess and the Frog, and I think they have like explicit songs about their goals, like I just can't wait to be king, and then so Simba's like really excited about this, and then something really dramatic happens in his life and he kind of abandons that goal. And what can we learn from that? Like there was something that he was very stressed out, he changed his goal, and then you can kind of have kids reflect on that and like, have you had a goal and then decided to abandon it? Like why did you do that? Like do you feel like there's lots of obstacles to you accomplishing your goal? And kind of reflecting on that and trying to figure out what can we do when things get in our way. And I feel like the same thing can be seen in Tiana's story. She has songs about like she's singing I'm almost there, and like she's very explicit about her goal of trying to make a restaurant happen that starts like when she was really little and kind of stems from her relationship with her dad. And then she gets turned into a frog and things kind of go haywire, but she doesn't ever like lose sight of that. But there's other songs that kind of change her goals of like, oh, I need to also have people in my life and like have positive relationships, and maybe that's not in conflict, or like how do I balance that with going after my professional goals? And I think that's something that all of us can learn and get better at in just our regular lives, as well as it's a good example to have for kids that she is reflecting on this and kind of struggling with it a little bit. And sometimes it's hard because these movies are so short, like they're only maybe an hour and a half, that you don't see as much of a realistic example as you might see in real life of how do I overcome these obstacles, how do I maintain motivation in face of certain obstacles, how do I manage the emotions and stress, like accomplishing a PhD is maybe a little bit different. It takes a lot longer than an hour and a half to complete. But yeah, so I think those, and Rapunzel as well, she like has this new dream, and there's it's not just the main protagonist in those movies as much as it's also like their love interest or whatever, that they also have some character development and changes in their goals that I think are good examples for kids of all gender identities. Even if they don't care about princess movies, they might still be able to learn something from watching those. Yeah, that was one main tenant, I guess. But
yeah, it's maybe for our
yeah.
PhDs we need more theme songs.
Yes, I've been thinking about writing a post of like, what are the best Disney songs for like different stages of your PhD. So I might have to make a
Yeah.
playlist and why they might stir up feelings of motivation, or like how do we feel motivation, and how does like song kind of affect that. So I'm sure listening to some of these motivational songs could be a good thing to help kids
Yeah.
out with figuring out their goals as
Yeah.
well.
What I keep hearing you say like with Tiana and like the various characters, and like
Mhm,
these, things happen that maybe derail their like dream or goal. Um
mhm.
and it's that perseverance and like the growth mindset kind of attitude, right? Like,
Yeah.
okay, like this has happened, and so that like yet kind of thing, right? So like, okay, this has
Mhm,
happened, I haven't achieved my goal yet, but um
mhm.
really kind of like keeping them going. And like, yeah, I mean, don't recall a Disney movie or a Pixar movie where they just give up completely in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
end. I mean, there are times when they give up and get frustrated and it looks like all
Mhm.
hope is lost.
Yeah, yeah. They have to have that low point. That's like kind of part of classic Disney storytelling, I feel like, and part of the hero's journey that so many of these movies kind of fit into. But I guess, yeah, relating to that growth mindset idea, I feel like not many of these characters have this idea that I think they all kind of have this growth mindset, or they might not have had it right at the beginning. They might have thought like, oh, I'm not capable of this at all. And then like over the course of the film, they learn that they can. um, but it's I don't know that they ever have a moment, yeah, that are just like that they stay with like, oh, I can't do this. I'm never going to accomplish this. It's like the failure is all on me. Like I think there are lots of examples, I guess, of like they can recognize kind of the situational things that are in their way, that it's not just all of their fault. There's a lot of other factors that are contributing to either their success or their failure, which I think ties in with growth mindset. A little bit of like, yes, I can still improve, I can still get better, I am capable of doing things. Yeah, I'm trying to think of like a really, but I think that also connects to just like a lot of these movies are also about developing self-confidence and like the self-awareness of like, can I do these
Mm-hmm.
things? And there's a whole bunch of like all of the I want songs is like the classic song that's at a lot of the beginnings, like Part of Your World is a very classic one from Little Mermaid of like, this is what I want. Again, that's, yeah, goal setting. But she's confident that she can reach those goals of becoming a human or joining the human world, even if her dad is like, no, that's a terrible idea, which maybe he has a good point. But yeah, these characters are pretty confident or they're developing confidence. And I think you could ask kids questions of like, would you be as confident as this character if you were faced with like a similar situation? Why or why not? And what might that would be a lot of like structuring of like, what can we do to try and help you develop the confidence to go into difficult situations, and feel like you're capable of accomplishing things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah. And I think identifying even the negative emotions in those instances, even if you're not confident, that's another skill. And I think Inside Out, although I have some issues with it from like a neuroscience perspective,
Yeah.
I think does a really good job and can be really helpful and instructional, especially for socio-emotional learning, because it kind of identifies like here are 5 key emotions, which in some ways match up, I think, with like research on what are our main emotions, and
Mm-hmm.
some of them are not necessarily the most dominant 5 emotions, but just giving kids the language to talk about their emotions and be able to identify, oh, I'm feeling like anger right now, or I'm doing something similar to the sadness character, and trying to figure out, oh, can I do some of the things that this character does to help me feel more like joy or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, that movie when it came out, I was like so excited about it. I was just like, we're labeling emotions. It's a good like a first step.
Yes, yeah, I think yeah, definitely a good first step, and I think it opens up a lot of conversations about, like, do parents and kids kind of deal with emotions similarly? Do they have the same emotions? Do they have other emotions? Like, what other emotions do you think aren't represented
Mm-hmm.
in this movie that you feel like you'd have felt? I think that would be a really interesting. I really wanna ask a kid that now.
Yeah, like there's just so many. I mean, in education, all the time when I'm talking to teachers, what we're hearing is like the storybooks, like use literature to like foster social and emotional
Mhm.
skills,
Yeah.
and I think very much so, like these same questions can be applied to like, our cartoons and Disney movies and,
Yeah.
um, and it's interesting like when you were speaking earlier about like the goal setting and like just how intrinsically like these kind of skills of the characters themselves are so important to the
Mhm.
storyline and for there to be a
Mhm.
story. um
Yeah.
yeah, I didn't study English literature a whole lot, but like that would be really
Me
really
either.
interesting to start looking at like how these kind of overlap into, just the basic premise of like how you tell a story. um
Yeah.
yeah, that would be
Yeah.
fascinating.
And I think these the yeah, the conversations in themselves of, like, trying to ask a child, like, "How do you feel about this character?" Like, "Do you see similarities and differences between you and this character?" is, like, a practice in, like, social awareness and perspective taking as a skill itself, and, like, having empathy for these characters, and that's also why these movies and stories work, because we are empathetic towards the main characters and sometimes towards the villains too, and, like, what do we do when we recognize that we are empathetic and similar to both good and bad
Hmm.
characters? What do we do with that? But yeah, those conversations, and then like then there's the second level of, are the characters actually having social awareness? Are they being empathetic? Are they engaging in perspective taking? And I think there are some examples that are better than others, and I think just at maybe more of a meta level of like whether Disney as a company is doing very well at showcasing additional perspectives besides like a white male dominated industry and the narratives
Yeah.
that they are most familiar with. And I like changing, but there's still a lot of room for them to grow. And I think that those might be conversations. I don't know if those are conversations that are best had with like older kids or if they're conversations that you can have with like elementary school and
Hmm.
younger kids as well.
Yeah, so that brings me to like another question that I have, and I think your work with looking at these like science communication and Disney movies and Pixar movies kind of starts getting at this is what skills do kids need to have at various age points. I'm not trying to get you to go on like a developmental journey with us, but what
Yeah, yeah.
skills are like really important for them to be consuming these movies and then benefiting from these?
Mm,
Do you have any
yeah,
ideas there,
yeah.
or?
Yeah, I mean, I think the social awareness and like recognizing, okay, how am I relating to these characters, I think is helpful for appreciating the movies as well as like discussing them with other people. And then I think there are a lot of skills about decision making that are kind of involved in that of like, are you critically thinking about who who is telling these stories, like who is creating these stories, who is voicing these characters. I think that's something that you can find that information like through a little bit of research, um, as well as like whether they're through advertisements and interviews and stuff with the people behind the movies. But yeah, so I think there's a lot of decision making that goes on and like evaluating whether the characters are making good decisions and whether you should be like certain characters or not. I think that's another set of skills. And I mean, adults too, I think we can always be more critical of the media that we consume. So I, people of all ages, I think, would benefit from having a more critical eye, even if it sometimes can make the movie watching experience a little less enjoyable. I guess I think it's worth doing at least after you've watched the movie, so you can kind of enjoy it for what it is, and then like reflect on it a little bit more after you've watched it and after you've found out some more information about the movie. Like I've recently learned, like I watched Mulan, the new live action Mulan that came out on September 4th on Disney Plus, and I enjoyed the movie. I think it did things very differently than the previous one, but there's a lot of controversy around the people that are involved in it and how it was made and where it was made, that you wouldn't necessarily know just from watching it, and you can like appreciate the movie for like the beautiful work of art that it is, but still also be critical while researching, okay, what how can future movies be more ethically made
Hmm.
and more considerate of the cultures that they're
Hmm.
representing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it brings up that social awareness and cultural awareness, and even looking into the
Hmm.
stories that are being told, right? And the
Hmm. Hmm.
representations of gender and ethnicity and culture, like Pocahontas, right? Like, what is the true story
Oh
behind
yeah. Oh.
that? And so
Yeah.
it's I think they are interesting and a good way to kind of start introducing these conversations potentially at a very young age, and I think right now it's
Yeah.
very fitting to have these conversations, like we're having
Mhm.
the scholar strike and everything
Yeah.
happening sparked by Black Lives Matter and indigenous rights, and it's
Mhm.
I think it
Mhm.
really kind of brings an opportunity to start talking about these things. Obviously at a developmentally appropriate age, but and like the types of questions that you're asking, think it's important to start these
Yeah.
conversations, while they're still fairly young, so there's an awareness there.
As a science communicator, I think I have to be really aware of that as well. Like I've tried to write posts or like there's a big trend in the Disney community, which is kind of one of my target audiences, where you dress up as characters but using like regular clothes. It's called Disney bounding. So you can like wear that to the park and not be in trouble for like wearing a costume, because they don't want little kids confusing like a non-employee with like the actual character or something like that. But there's a lot of like cultural appropriation that could go on with that. And so just being careful to educate people about that and not doing that myself, so that I'm considering the perspectives of Native American communities, Indigenous communities, the Black communities, and like how they would feel if like me as a white woman were to like take some part of their culture and talk about it, or even like represent it visually in some way. That it's definitely something that I have to be very aware of and try and educate other people about, even if they don't want to hear it, or they don't want all of these politics in air quotes contaminating their Disney or something like that, which is a
Yeah, it's
contentious thing in the
well, I
Disney
mean, and
community.
it's like so relevant right now. I mean, our university just stopped a screening of Mulan because of the controversy. I don't remember what they're replacing it
Mm,
with, but we were gonna watch that virtually all together,
uh-huh.
and they've replaced it with a different movie. Um,
Interesting.
yeah, very, very
Okay.
interesting.
Yeah. I wonder if instead of replacing it, it might be more productive to like have a conversation about it so that other people can like maybe not just know, oh, it was canceled for some reason and I'm not sure why, but like being informed about why and spreading that knowledge and those being able to talk
Yeah,
about these difficult issues, or just developing more cultural awareness in the university
just to have a
community.
little like sit-in info session and yeah, to talk about it.
Hmm.
And so you mentioned like what you're doing as a science communicator. And so I
Hmm.
wonder how you consciously or unconsciously are seeing yourself integrating these skills into like lesson plans that you're creating. I know that's something you're working on.
Hmm.
And just like how
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
seeing that kind of all meld together in your role as a science communicator that looks at Disney stuff and Pixar.
Yeah. Yeah, I think definitely. I think one of the biggest things, both as like anyone that's trying to convey information to someone, so both as like an educator and as a science communicator, I have to consider the perspective of my audience, both in terms of like the knowledge that they have. So if I'm making a lesson plan, I don't want to assume that they have knowledge that they don't, so that they won't understand something. As well as a science communicator, I don't want to use like too much jargon. And that was something that we talked about a lot, or like labeling people as doctors or the exact kind of scientist that they are is something that we do a lot as science journalists, so that the people that are reading it kind of might know who we're talking about and are familiar with the words that we're using, so we're not talking to a different audience. Um, and I think, yeah, just that perspective taking of what do they know, and that's also part of like the Disney community. Like, I think I probably put in a lot of like niche knowledge that Disney fans might know that people who aren't as like avid fans might not get, and that's something that I always wrestle with, of like how much do I put that in, how much do I leave it out, or like do I just target like a more general Disney fan knowledge base with what I'm writing. So that's definitely one of the big things. And then I think in another way, I'm trying to change people's perspectives, especially about like who scientists are. That's something that I am really trying to do. Again, with the thing that you mentioned of like, okay, what happens if like Pixar female characters were to go to graduate school, and trying to help young women and just other minoritized groups like visualize themselves as part of STEM when historically they have been excluded or not felt comfortable. And yeah, there's a lot of current practices, not just historically, that are excluding minoritized groups in STEM. So trying to draw attention to those issues as well as help them envision like, yes, it is possible for me to be a valuable member in STEM. And so I've been doing that a lot with the series that I made called Science Represented, X to stand in as a bi, Disney, and I like connect a character like a princess or something like that. And I find scientists that either research something that's related to what the princess might be interested in. So like Rapunzel is obsessed with the stars, or the glowing lanterns, but she thought they were stars. So finding like an astronomer and or, someone who just researches the planets and try and connect, oh, is there like a corona galaxy because that's the name of her kingdom or something like that, and connecting that so you can see that scientists can be girly, scientists can also like princesses, changing that representation. And yeah, also drawing attention to issues that minoritized groups are facing so that people who aren't in those groups can have more empathy for the issues that they're facing and try and do something about it. Like especially there's, oh, actually, I didn't actually write about astronomy for Rapunzel. I think I did on the blog, but on an Instagram post, I wrote how she is like one of the few princesses who interacts with ruffians and thugs. And I think people with criminal histories don't get talked about a lot, and the issues that they face of like being disenfranchised and not having like the right to vote in a lot of places. And so people research criminal justice and they research disenfranchisement and different policy changes. So I tried to connect those two because Rapunzel would be really empathetic to actual people facing those difficulties. Yeah, sorry if I've
That's
went on a little rant there.
they're not like connections that you would normally make until you really start taking that kind of critical eye and thinking about the what ifs and noticing maybe those side characters that like, okay, what stories are they also representing, right? And like so often it's
Yeah,
it's focused on
yeah.
the prince and the princess and you know um the
Mm-hmm.
story around them and like the goofy friend or whatever. But it's looking at those
Yeah,
different
yeah.
representations around is really really neat. That is a really interesting
Mm-hmm.
connection. So with talking about Rapunzel and talking to and spending time with the ruffians and thugs, it's fostering those relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And so like I wonder if you can like explore that a little bit more, because relationship building is certainly prevalent in different
Yeah,
aspects
very
of
important.
science communication and like you alluded to,
Mm-hmm.
knowing your audience and like being able to take their
Yeah.
perspective and understand, they may not understand our jargon that we might be using from the academy or whatever, right?
Exactly.
So,
Yeah, I can take it from two prongs, I guess. So like the relationship building as it's like maybe represented in Disney movies, I think a lot of the examples from Disney movies involve like teamwork to accomplish whatever goal. Like, yes, Rapunzel like relied on the ruffians to kind of get Eugene. Well, yeah, because Rapunzel got trapped, and then spoilers, I guess, at the end, the ruffians and thugs like get Eugene or Flynn Rider out of prison where he's going to be executed, and they wouldn't basically the resolution wouldn't have happened without these ruffians and thugs that like orchestrate this entire jailbreak. If Rapunzel hadn't been kind to them in the beginning and hadn't been empathetic and tried to understand that they have dreams and desires and wishes just like the main protagonist, then they might not have been willing to help. We might not have seen them ever again in the whole movie. So that definitely advocates and is a good example for kids to see, oh, I'm nice to people, not necessarily like they'll do things for me, but like it's just it always helps to be nice and to develop positive relationships with people. um, and that is a big part of teamwork. And then on the science communication side, I mean, yes, the people that I'm trying to communicate to, I have to build relationships with. So I want to know like what are they curious about? What do they want to know about? What do they know? And like I might not know that if I haven't already built a relationship with them by responding to their questions either in direct messages on Instagram or comments, or like commenting on other people who are, because there's a ton of other science communicators, especially on
mhm.
Instagram also. So that's a lot of relationship building, of supporting each other. And I mean, this, like, I wouldn't be on this podcast, I feel like, if we hadn't connected and developed a relationship through other pathways and stuff as well. And if other people hadn't been doing science communication, like Chris Cloney of the Grad Blogger podcast, right? That we might not have connected. So that's a really big aspect of being a science communicator, is talking to other science communicators and then talking to the scientists that are doing the
Mhm.
work that we're writing about and communicating about. And you have to, there are some scientists that don't have like the best relationship with journalists or with people writing about their work because they feel like science communicators or journalists just aren't going to get it right, or they're going to say something that's inaccurate or overgeneralized. And it is a fine balance. Like, you don't want to be inaccurate for sure, but you also, your audience usually doesn't care about like the nitty gritty details that the scientist does and that knows about and that they can explain. So yeah, it's a lot of decision making about which details to include, but it's about, okay, I have a relationship to my audience to provide something that's entertaining as well as educational as well as accurate, and how do I balance that relationship with the relationship with the scientist, where I want to be really respectful and like very grateful to them for spending time, because usually people that are talking to science communicators and journalists are not paid for the time that they are dedicating and devoting to spreading their science knowledge. So just really communicating how grateful you are to them for that, because yeah, all of science communication is about teamwork and kind of facilitating those relationships. So yeah, thanks for asking that question. That was a good question.
Thank you for having so much like perspective on various things and being able to make so many connections. I mean, it's something that I do all the time, and just like, oh, it's connected in this way and this way. Like, social emotional skills are,
Yeah.
in everything that we do. And I know we were having a conversation
Mm-hmm.
outside of this, like just talking about like, not everybody necessarily knows what social emotional learning is. But then when you break it down and bring it back to those essential skills, like it's, emotional awareness, emotion regulation, emotions and reactions, and knowing your own self-esteem, your own capabilities, and all that stuff that we've talked about a little bit here. When you break it down to those
Yeah.
things, it's suddenly like, oh yeah, it's, in everything we're doing.
Yeah, but I feel like usually they just get talked about like one at a time. Like, we'll talk about just like building up self-esteem or self-confidence and not consider how they're interrelated with all of the other socio-emotional learning competencies, and that they are, and they're all integrated with each other, and they all help build on one another. So it is valuable to talk about them as a group and as a set.
I mean, one of the first things that I talk about with my adult students, they're educators, is like, it's so hard to not talk about one without the other, and like you end up snowballing. And like they really didn't like the questions when I was like, what do you think is the most important skill? They were just like, well, I can't choose just one. Yeah.
Yeah, I would have to agree with
Yeah.
that. I don't
Well,
know
and
what I
that's
would
why I
answer for that
ask it, right? Is
question.
just really to drive that point home that there are so many interconnections. Yeah. So it's great to see that you're making these connections in your practice as a science communicator, and what you're seeing in these movies and looking at the storytelling aspect of it. Yeah, so it's really, really fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And I mean, I think it's valuable to, and part of perspective taking too, of like everyone is going to make different connections because everyone has different prior knowledge. And so they're going to, and I mean, I think a lot about how our knowledge is organized in my own research and how teachers' knowledge is organized. And like, how is it connected? Is it connected permanently? Is it connected kind of in the moment kind of thing? And so everyone's going to have different connections that they're making, whether it's among these socio-emotional concepts or just anything that they see in a Disney movie with their own life. And I think that appreciating that and valuing that, and rather than thinking that someone making a weird connection that you hadn't thought of is weird or like unwelcome, that we should be appreciating those differences of
Definitely.
patterns
Yeah.
of thought.
Well, I think that, we've talked about so many things. So I really,
We
really
have.
appreciate
But it was fun.
you coming and speaking to me today. It's been a great conversation, and I'm sure we could go forever.
We could. Yeah.
But yeah, thank you so, so much for joining today and sharing your knowledge and profession of being a science communicator. And thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I would happily talk for an hour about every single Disney movie, and we could do like a deep dive for each character and each story. But hopefully, this gave a good overview, and I would love to hear what kinds of things people notice after this conversation, and they can message me on Instagram at the PhD Princess.
Yeah, for sure.
About it more.
Maybe we'll have to do like a series later. That would be really fun.
Ooh, I would love that. That would
We'll
be great.
talk. So you have been listening to the SEL in Action podcast. We've been talking with Sarah White, the PhD Princess. You can check her out at thephdprincess.com or at the PhD Princess on Instagram and Twitter. And yeah, definitely reach out to her or myself about what you notice about Disney movies, about Pixar movies, and maybe how you integrate them or ask your kids or students questions about them to build and foster these skills. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.